This show. I'm your host, Justin Jacobson. This week we'll be discussing esports shoutcasters. Just a disclaimer, nothing here is intended as legal advice. Is all the information is for educational purposes only. This week's guest is Al, known as IHOLDSHIFT. IHOLDSHIFT is the founder of Clutch DG. He's also an esports personality, streamer, and professional caster. Having worked in various leagues and titles, including the Call of Duty League, Call of Duty Challengers League, College COD, Call of Duty Warzone, Call of Duty Mobile, and Valorant. Thanks so much for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be fun.
My pleasure. So let's kind of start talking about your past gaming experience. What was the first game you played?
Oh, gosh. I actually don't know off the top of my head. It's kind of funny because, like, I didn't really grow up playing games. I was a very sporty kid growing up, but probably, it would have been a Super Nintendo. So it was probably like something like Super Mario World or something like that. Had to have been the first. Yeah, like when I was a kid. But I really don't know. I actually don't know if that's accurate or not.
Okay, so some earlier game memories. You weren't at the Nintendo or Sega. You kind of came in that next iteration.
Yeah, I remember my grandparents had like a regular Nintendo, like NES. And so maybe like Tetris or something on that. Like I remember they had like the Duck Hunt gun too, so like I'm sure I played that, but I don't remember what the actual first video game was that I ever played. But it would have been when I was a kid, something along those lines.
Awesome. Well, I feel like that's my earliest memories, using the duck hunt gun, like holding it against the TV screen, like thinking that I'm gonna get to the duck quicker. Like I always like have that image in my head. So how'd you kind of get involved in the esports realm?
Yeah, it's kind of like a situation of random circumstance, if I'm being completely honest. I mean, like I said, I kind of grew up playing sports and did the traditional kind of model through high school into college, and stuff like that. And of course, like along the way, like any guy does when they're growing up, play games, play sports games, things like that. But I did kind of get into playing like a bunch of really random, like free to play FPS games when I was in college. And I ended up getting like hit up one day by this group of people that were like, hey, we're running like this national qualifier for a game called Alliance of Valiant Arms. It was like the most free to play FPS stereotypical type you could ever think of. And I was like, yeah, like I'll give it a go. I'll do some broadcasting. Like I'd known all the pro players. I wasn't particularly great myself, but I knew all the players that were playing in the tournament and I knew the game well. And I did that, and it was like a solo cast for like 6 hours. I had no idea what I was doing. But I got a lot of good positive feedback, and the company that ran that broadcast ended up kind of running other things and other free-to-play FPS games. And I remember my first event that I ever like went to, and again, it was very loose, but it was like QuakeCon 2011, like old school BYOC type event in Dallas. And that was like the first time that I'd really ever been like in a live environment, but it still was like we had a setup of 2 computers and it was just 2 of us casting free to play games that were being showcased by publishers. Yeah, so that was kind of just like a random circumstance type thing. And then I started getting into Paladins really big as a way to kind of like prep up for Overwatch because I really wanted to get involved with Overwatch. But I never got into the beta. I couldn't find any opportunities to like get involved with like casting some of the earlier stuff because so many big name people were trying to jump into the Overwatch ship. So I started doing stuff with Paladins, which is a free to play game by Hi-Res Studios. And I ended up falling in love with that game and I ended up casting for like their international events once a season for about like 2.5, 3 years. So that was kind of like my first actual like foray into actually getting involved with esports was with Hi-Res Studios back in the day.
Amazing. So you kind of just like fell into it, right? It was like
legitimately
your enjoyment of the game and you just said yes, right? Sometimes you just say yes, right?
Absolutely. It was just one of those things like I went to school to be a teacher. And when I graduated for like 2.5 years after I graduated, there was just no jobs in social studies teaching. If you weren't a math or a science teacher, it was so hard to find education jobs. So like kind of out of a hobby, but also like need for necessity, I was like, I got to find something else to do if education's not it. And I was working in restaurants and stuff like that too, like just working food service. And I enjoyed that, but I knew it wasn't going to be like a forever type thing. So just kind of played around with whatever came my way until I eventually found something I liked.
Amazing. So that's kind of how it goes, right? It's like you sometimes fall into your situation when you're not even intending for it.
Absolutely.
So what are kind of some of the games you cast for? I know we mentioned a lot of different FPS ones.
Yeah, the FPS world definitely has like taken a grip on me. I mean, it started off with the passion of wanting to do Overwatch, and eventually I did do some stuff with Overwatch Challengers back in like 2018, 2019. But the ladder to go up in that space was so difficult. It was so oversaturated with great commentators, and I knew that that was going to be a long-term grind. And where I was at that point, all young 30s trying to get into esports for the first time, I knew that really wasn't a great option, in terms of finding not immediate but quick success to make it feasible. And I was kind of evaluating the Call of Duty space as well at the same time, and realized that there really wasn't anyone doing any coverage of like the semi-pro amateur space. That was back still when the CWL was happening. And I actually think I got a little bit fortunate with the timing of when I got into COD, because that was the first year in Black Ops 4 where the 16 pro teams were the 16 pro teams. So there was an amateur circuit for the entirety of the year. And I kind of realized that there was an opportunity here to do some YouTube coverage and try to get involved with broadcasting and commentating in that space that really no one else had been doing much of. So that was kind of a strategic move on my side. And since that point, I've kind of just taken everything in Call of Duty in stride. Wherever I could possibly get involved, I try to get involved, whether that's Challengers now, obviously the CDL part of that conversation, but I've also done a lot with Warzone, done a lot with Call of Duty Mobile, and Warzone Mobile since that game has recently kind of had its global launch. I'm, obviously trying to stay involved with that too. So anything and everything COD is kind of where my main focus is.
So what are some similarities and kind of differences between casting for first person shooters and maybe battle royales,
Sure.
different game genres?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, stylistically, there's always going to be differences in, one game to another, let alone one genre of game to another. I think, we'd very quickly see, like, if I were to jump and try to do Halo, for instance, 4v4 FPS shooter, kind of an arena shooter in similar forms of, respawn elements that Call of Duty largely has. I still think that it would be I would have enough of a ground level understanding to be able to cast the game, but there's still so many unique differences to where you'd kind of have to learn the ins and the outs, little niches and kind of hijinks and things that make the game specifically them. And it's not just like you read it off a piece of paper, then you internalize it, you learn it, and then that you can digest that quickly. You kind of have to find other ways to consume the game and really understand it. But yeah, I think, the genre portion of the question is, I've done some stuff with like Rocket League in the past, and kind of the same thing with like looking at Overwatch. Every game has its own style. And when you also do see that when it comes to things like the Battle Royale genre, whether that be in the Call of Duty mobile space, they have a BR there, or Warzone, or now Warzone Mobile. Every game has its different uniquenesses to it, and there is a different stylistic thing when that one game of one drop of Warzone is going to last 40 plus minutes possibly, where a game of Hardpoint lasts 8. So, I mean, there's a different narrative building, different storytelling elements that you go through, and different pacing and tempos. But every game, every genre has something that is uniquely different to it, which I think is really kind of cool when you kind of compare it to like traditional sports. It's the same way. It's like NFL commentator, you can't just jump and immediately go into like the Major League Baseball space. And, there's so many unique differences when it comes to it, and each space kind of dictates and demands its own styles from the broadcast team, I think, in general.
Is there any difference between maybe casting for mobile versus console PC titles? Have you noticed anything in that realm?
Not as much, actually. I mean, there are differences. I mean, Call of Duty Mobile compared to the regular Call of Duty multiplayer is a legacy game, to where all of the weapons, all of the maps, all draw off of previous Call of Duty titles. But it also plays 5v5 compared to 4v4. They also use more overall score streaks, and they also use operator specialist abilities. So similar to previous Black Ops games that we had in the past. So again, like, it's not too different, but it is a collection of unique things that we've never really seen before in Call of Duty. So it does require, again, a different level of commentary style in certain ways. I mean, Hardpoint's still Hardpoint, Search and Destroy still Search and Destroy, Control is still Control. The maps are going to be different every given title of Call of Duty. So again, that's not new to kind of comparing the mobile space into the regular space. But it does require a different level of attention and timing and focus than like what the current Modern Warfare 3 does, because it's 5v5, the respawn timer's fast. Like there are all these little things that do dictate you have to approach it just a touch differently.
Is there any interest in maybe expanding to any non-shooter titles, any other genres, or?
I mean, like I said, I kind of gave Rocket League a little bit of a go for a minute. Very quickly realized that it was going to take a lot of time and energy to be able to follow COD Mobile, regular Call of Duty, Warzone, and also learn a new title in Rocket League. You know, when you try to go with a game that's been around for years and the competitive space has a wealth of history, you kind of have to know all of that stuff, or at least start to be able to approach those conversation points of, yeah, this player a couple of years ago did this, that, and the other thing. You don't just get to, again, digest that overnight. And I kind of made the realization that I would rather be the expert in 2 titles rather than be good in 3. So I kind of thought about it and was like, maybe not worth the energy and the attention. But it is like a guilty pleasure game. Like I watch a ton of esports that aren't FPS based titles. The fighting game scene is another one that like I love watching Evo, stuff like that. But you know, in terms of like trying to get involved from the professional commentary side, I kind of like know my limits, so to speak, in terms of being able to produce something, you know, as an on-camera talent that is actually valuable to the broadcast, not just kind of like waffling my way through basic information to try to sound like I know what I'm talking about.
Right. I think that's a really interesting point for people out there is that, you know, to get to the level to do this at a professional level, you need to really know more than just how the game plays. There's so much more than that.
Absolutely.
And, you know, people I don't think realize that. They're like, you know, they see what you're doing, but they don't really know the prep behind it. They don't know what it takes, like you said, to study things at a high level over a long period of time. Like some of these people's careers are, you know, years. So it's understanding how they've evolved over this, who they played with before, and are they playing with a former teammate? You know, all of these kind of subplots factor in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is one of those situations that I feel like at face level, and it's kind of like you would look at like an NFL broadcast or an NBA broadcast, whatever it happens to be. You know, the audience is just kind of taking in what you're saying. But, you know, I think at a certain level, the esports scene, because there's less of a barrier between audience and esports personalities, whether you want to call it as commentators or streamers, whatever it happens to be, it's such a thin line between the two that I think often, you know, one of the biggest gripes you start to hear from like the community is like, wow, like, does this guy even play the game? Or like, oh, this guy's only gold and ranked. It's just like, Joe Buck calls Monday Night Football, and I'd be surprised if he could throw a football more than 15 yards.
Yeah, I wonder what his 40-yard dash is.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there is like a level of, you know, the curtain's really thin between those, and I think there is this level of like the audience that watches esports can come across as like you see more of the person than it is the profession, and that can come with a level of criticisms or unknown quantities. But I could tell you flat out, like a lot of people that I work with, you know, not just to say about myself, but you know, there is a lot of prep that goes in outside of the hours that you are actually on camera. That's without question.
Right, and I think that's one of these things to overlook. So, talk a little about casting large tournaments and events. You know what it's like, and you know some memorable moments in your career so far.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation point because, you know, I've been doing this full time now, you know, as a freelancer for 5 years, we'll call it, you know, since I got involved with Black Ops 4 back during 2019. Maybe a little bit before that, but we'll just kind of use the Call of Duty scene as kind of our calendar space. And I've done a lot of stuff, you know, COD Mobile World Championships. I've done we'll call it 2.5 of those, with the first World Championship still being kind of separated and split because of COVID stuff. But the last 2 years, it's been in some pretty big venues. But it wasn't really until this year where I felt like I was actually doing a major broadcast when I did my first major at Boston. Because that was really the first time that I had done an event where a large group of people were there specifically for what I was on show-wise. You know, even when I was doing Paladins in the past, like I'd done World Championships there and a couple of the regional tournaments, but you know, those audiences are a couple of hundred people, not a couple of thousands of people. So really Boston was my first true taste at that. And I had plenty of experience working in studios and doing studio-based shows, live shows, things like that. But in terms of being able to like really feed off of an audience energy, that was the first time I'd really done it. And I won't lie, like there was a level of nerve and maybe just anxiousness about hey, like I know that this is a familiar space. I've been on a stage in front of an audience, but not like this. It was a totally different level. And I remember the first map that I casted with Study. Like I remember looking over to him when we were on break, and I was like, I feel like I'm just kind of surviving right now. He's like, dude, you're doing great. And by the time we got back after the search and destroy, I started to feel like I started to catch real stride. And of course, that weekend was really capped off by that phase optic game. I mean, that map 4 invasion hardpoint was probably one of my favorite calls of all time. And it just kind of wasn't because of like what I said or how we approached it, but it was the pacing with Study and I, a new duo that we had never really had a chance to cast together before, but it was also the audience energy that came through. The call itself I thought was fine, but I think the moment was just heightened so much by the environment, right? And that comes with the major tournament question and being at a major event, and that also being one of my first times being in front of an audience that again was dictatively there for that, especially that matchup in particular. So yeah, that was a really cool moment for sure.
Right, I think that's one of those differences that with the live events and these big crowds where you can feed off the energy.
yeah.
Where like people are on the Twitch broadcast and they like feel what's going on there. And I know I was at Madison Square Garden for League of Legends, maybe it was a year or two ago, and it was like something happened and the whole place was just like electric. And I couldn't imagine, like, the whole place went crazy, and like I couldn't imagine like being a caster and like making that call and then seeing the crowd react to it and like kind of pairing, like, whoa, that just happened, and everyone else reacting to it. Like, it's probably interesting.
Yeah, it's wild because I've been to so many Call of Duty majors, a lot of it for commentating over the Challenger space, but I've also been purely as a fan too. Before the Challenger space really started to have major opens at every single major event. I'm thinking back to like Cold War and Modern Warfare 2019, and a little bit of Vanguard as well at the beginning of the year. So like it's one of those situations. Like I look back at those moments and any call that comes through is legitimately like not trying to like take over the moment, but I think truly, and I can really speak to this with the CDL team, is we're all so passionate as fans. Like these are just our reactions as fans. So it's really cool to kind of feel that neutral energy lift with a collection of all of us that are just so here for the climactic moments. It's so cool, man. It's such a fun experience.
Amazing. So you've kind of casted both professional as well as the collegiate level. So what kind of similarities between working on the collegiate and professional, and what are some of the differences from a casting production side?
Yeah, I think the similarities, I won't say they start and end at they play the same game, but it leans towards that because it's really tough to compare. Like, and this happened back during Cold War. I remember this moment specifically where Zuma's watch parties were starting to gain some momentum, and he was watch partying over a college COD game. And I remember watching this Twitch chat while that was happening because I wasn't on the broadcast when he was first watching, and everyone's like, wow, these guys are terrible. This sucks. I mean, it's like, it's not the same game. They don't play at the level of an Optic or a FaZe or whatever it happens to be. And I think for, the esports scene at large, we're so captivated by what the flagships are in every title. Your CWLs or CDLs, your OWCSs now, your ESL majors for CSGOs, your LCS, your League Worlds, all the things that happen at the top, the tippity top of whatever the esport happens to be, that, as a college space, you want to try to provide a production and audience experience that is enjoyable and shows sincerity and the right level of attention to detail when it comes to quality. But at the same time, there's also a very unique identity behind what those broadcasts serve a purpose for, and what those leagues in general, just to kind of even go more elementary than that, what they're there for in the first place. And they're there to give kids a chance to, in large terms, not just have a pathway towards potentially coming pro, because esports doesn't follow the traditional sports model of you're a great high school athlete, you get a scholarship to go play in college, then you get drafted, and depending on the sport, maybe you stay in the minor league for a while before you see the pros. Esports isn't like that. If you don't have it by the age of 20, you may not ever make it as a pro. Like, and doing the whole college space is not a requirement, nor is it really looked at as anything of major significance towards a path to pro. The college space is there to give kids a chance to pursue an education through a means of them being good at games. And that has taken off, I think, in the last 5 years. pretty astronomically. Kids getting full ride scholarships to D2, D3 tech schools, or sometimes even D1 schools that are in your Power 5 conferences to play games. And it kind of sounds silly, I think, in certain ways when you say it out loud and you really internalize what you're saying. But I think overall, it's just a really cool way to give kids another chance to pursue an education through a passion. As a broadcast, of course, we want to try to make it feel like, the NCAA championship and whatever title. But, I think at the base level, we're not there yet. It's just trying to find ways to help push along the space more from the bottom up. If you were to consider baseball to be, you've got Little League, then you've got Structured City League, and then you've got your high school, your college, your minor leagues, and your pro sports. It'd be cool to see that happen in esports, but I don't think that we're on that same track looking at the collegiate space versus the flagship space or whatever esport you happen to be considering.
Definitely. Do you think it's going to grow? Or do you think that you're going to be doing more stuff in the collegiate space, or that there's going to be a need?
For me personally, I've actually taken a pretty significant step away from the college space. Not for any reason besides the fact that it should be a space to grow up and coming talent. It was a space that I kind of got my first big break doing college COD back during Black Ops 4. We had like a Friday showcase night. I ended up casting it with Benson. And that was the first time I really had a chance to kind of talk with him and kind of get his thoughts on like what I could do better. And, he ended up really being helpful in my pursuit towards wanting to do more stuff with the amateur space that year. So I feel like it's a space that is, again, it could be one of those moments where like, NCAA football commentators like Kirk Herbstreit and those guys, they're making tons of money and that's all they have to do or can do is like, hey, we can just do collegiate and that is our job. And we make good money off of that. And it's a very healthy space to be a part of. But the ecosystem for esports, it isn't there yet. And I think people are starting to realize that, we can't just invest fully into our flagship programs and expect success. You have to be able to support, the growing and modular spaces that are the semi-pro and collegiate space. But we're not quite there yet. It's growing rapidly and it's becoming more and more sincere every single year. But it is one of those things that I still look at where it is right now from the production side in particular. It should be used as a chance to get, up and coming talent, more of a serious chance to help grow their skills as well. So they can have more of a serious pursuit down the road in the professional space.
Right, I agree. I think that's an interesting point about how you can't expect the gameplay to be of the pro level because they're not pursuing this at a pro level, and you have to accept it for what it is. And that I think is really unique because a lot of, like you said, that's not what they're viewing it for.
Right.
They're viewing it to see like the best Call of Duty players playing each other.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of what they're used to.
Yeah, and I think just the final point on that is what we've seen a lot lately, especially looking at the Call of Duty space, are challengers players that have kind of found themselves at a point where it's just like, it hasn't happened yet in the pro league, but I'm really good, and there's a school willing to give me scholarship money to go pursue my education. So it gives them the opportunity to continue to pursue, towards the pro league. But there's also the opportunity for them to get their education in case, things don't work out. And I mean, across like games like Rocket League, League of Legends, and, Dan Ghosty's the prime example. And I guess now Kevin Fame in a certain way in the Call of Duty space is like, yeah, there is the opportunity to play in college COD and still make it to the pros. But I mean, if the pro spots are like 0.001% of players that currently play their games, the people that have made a pro career out of a collegiate program are so much more exponentially smaller and slimmer than that. You could probably count how many people have done it on two hands. So it's definitely not built in the same way, like, again, the traditional sports model is. And I think for a while, a lot of people looked at it like, who's, college, go do that and then be a great college player. And like, maybe there's a chance, but like, it's just not the way that esports recruits. It's just simply put, that's not how it happens.
Yeah, and I've learned this also, physical things. Your Twitch, just the way you are at the game, you're much better earlier in your age, certain games.
Yeah.
So as a result, once you start getting to college age, and the older you get, the less likely it's going to happen.
Sure.
So if you're at that college age already, not to say the ship has sailed because, there is those examples, but if you're not getting really recruited and picking it up when you're 16, 17 years old, it's probably not going to happen when you're 19, 20, 21.
Yeah. I mean, the esports space, like you said, it doesn't need the bodybuilding and muscle training that a college football player goes through. You know, that's where a lot of it is that growth range is not a necessity in esports. So it will never really be a place where that collegiate path will lead towards rising up the ladder. It's just not necessary, I think. But it is still a cool opportunity.
Yes, it's very cool. And someone who teaches at some of these classes, it's very, interesting. Like you said, it gives the students a lot of opportunities to pursue what they're passionate about and enjoy, while also, hedging their bet and, having a potential career. And, ultimately it's important to have a career and a degree, and, these things matter nowadays. So what's something you learned about casting maybe really didn't realize prior to getting involved?
It's a hard question to answer because this wasn't something that I looked at, as a professional career pursuit until it was kind of at my doorstep in a way. And I, kind of wanted to force myself in towards giving it a true go and like betting on myself to do it as a freelancer. Because at the same rate, there's also like, I learn something new every single day that I am doing something related towards commentary, whether that's actually on the camera, or if it's trying to create content, or if it's just sitting back and, tracking stats and trying to build up narratives for the weekend, whatever it happens to be. You learn something new every day. I think the biggest thing that I kind of learned is that, every individual commentator is so uniquely different into their casting philosophies, what they think the product should sound like or look like from their, kind of exposure and experience towards being in whatever space it happens to be. And that's not like a learning thing like, wow, I wish I would have known this earlier. It's more of I want to be in a spot to understand the people around me and be a part of that. And how do I help them live out what their philosophy is about the game versus how do I make my own vision kind of come into play? Like, there is a different level of teamwork that comes in than just the person that you're working immediately with as a co-commentator. Because there is a team, especially on the CDL side. All of us work together on the same product, so it shouldn't be our duo is different from that duo, is different from this duo. Like, it is a very cohesive mindset. So kind of understanding everybody and what they feel the product should look, sound, and feel like is something that I've really kind of learned a lot, especially this year. Challengers in the past leading into the CDL was very much you can kind of create and mold the space because it was, I won't say neglect, it's not the right word, but it wasn't as fully focused.
Wasn't the focal
Yeah, exactly.
point,
That's
right?
where I was going to go. It wasn't a super focal point unless you're a diehard COD fan. So we, when we were looking at that product, as a kind of a commentary team that had the ability to kind of talk that through, that was, we can create our own vision. But when you're dealing with like the CDL, there is something that is very discernibly, this is what the product is, this is what it should be, this is what it should sound like. So how do you get your personal philosophy to follow along with that? I think that's been kind of the really cool learning experience from this year.
Interesting. So what's your favorite part about casting?
I think the thing is, and kind of to harken back to something I already said, is like it allows me to just be a super fan in a very different way. I think that it's been really cool because I wasn't endemically a COD person before I got into commentary. I played, but I wasn't like a super fan of the dynasties that existed previously, through IWAW, MW3, Ghosts even. And so when I got into the space, I was just a fan of the game, fan of the title, fan of the players. And I think generally kind of also moving through the challenger space, the ability to be able to spotlight players that may not have gotten a look before. That has been, I think, my favorite part about being in the Call of Duty space and being in the commentary space for this title in particular, is when you see that kid that you've been casting over for the last handful of months, maybe even years, and they eventually get their shot. It kind of feels like you helped that path, like you were a part of that. And not to say that we were the only reason, but it is cool to be able to, point to things and speak about things and tweet about things and help bring people to the forefront of the conversation when it comes to getting a chance. That's, I think, my favorite part about what the job has been. And it's been really kind of cool, working with Study. This is the first year he's done any Challenger stuff. And, we spent all of season 1 talking about 0-4, a kid that came in this year out of nowhere And now he's getting a chance to play on the pro league. And I remember Jay telling me, he's like, this is so cool that we just like told this guy's story, and now he's in the league getting a shot. I was like, this is why we love it, man. It's like, it's just cool to be able to be a fan of that push, that career possibility and potential of players that are getting a chance. That's the real fun part about the job for me.
Amazing. So what's the hardest part?
I think there's a variety of ways to go about it. I think I could kind of umbrella it by saying just time management is definitely one of the more difficult parts. And it's not like it's super difficult. It just requires a level of attention to detail that I think a lot of people that get into the space had not experienced before. Even for me, someone who, again, like was planning on being a teacher, worked multiple jobs at the same time, did a bunch of other hobbies and things that were very uniquely different than your normal path. It's still stretched and tested what your time management skills look like. And I think a lot of that is not just the professional side, but like, how do you balance your personal life as well when your broadcasts are on weeknights and weekends? It does kind of, again, you are somebody who is helping someone else enjoy their time on a weeknight or a weekend. Their free time is spent watching esports. And that's when your job starts. So there is a professional level of like being able to modify that and kind of figure out what your time management is going to look like on those nights in particular. But there's also the level of like, if I don't work until 5 o'clock on any given day, like what am I going to do from 9 o'clock until 5 o'clock? Like there is a level of trying to manage what you're going to be doing and setting up. Like for me, I put together a to-do list, things like that to try to keep myself honest that I am still, putting closer to 40 hours a week in rather than just showing up for broadcast with a little bit of prep that I'd done over the course of the last couple of days or weeks, and then just kind of get through the broadcast. There is a level of making sure, I'm spending the time in the appropriate spaces to feel like I'm ready to go for any particular broadcast that happens.
Amazing. So what advice do you have for aspiring casters out there?
I mean, I think my biggest piece, and I get asked this question all the time, there's no one way to get involved. There's no one right way. There's really no right way in general in terms of like, how do you start as someone who says, this is something I want to pursue? How do you turn that into doing this as a full-time job? There's no good way about going about it. There's no bad way about going about it. You kind of just have to find things that work for you. My personal story is, I think, very uniquely different than a lot of people, just because I came into the space not as someone who was like endemically Call of Duty focused. I kind of used a little bit of more of an analytical approach of, here are the opportunities that maybe could lead towards being able to gain recognition and reputation. Doing stuff with YouTube, esports recaps and breakdowns, and not so much news stuff, but trying to find ways to, tell story through content. I found that was the biggest opportunity for me. The problem is, I think for a lot of people that I talk with now or work with now, trying to get into Call of Duty, is that, there's a pro league, there's a challenger space, there's a college space, and there's a lot of saturation and great commentators that are already there. So there is this level of, you have to try to find something that is unique, try to find ways to stand out. But you also kind of have to have this level of resiliency, no matter what title you find yourself in, to believe in yourself. And that doesn't just end with have faith that you can eventually do it. There is a level of, you have to kind of, again, put your time management into question. What are your goals for the year? Can you find ways to actually approach those and successfully achieve those? That's, another part about me is, I feel like I set myself some realistic goals every single year before a new game came out. I kind of looked at them and said, these are doable. How would I go about making sure this happens, or give myself the best chance for that to be successful? And then trusting that process. There is a level of grind that comes in with it, especially as somebody who's new, especially with the freelance space. For the first year and a half that I was casting Call of Duty, a lot of it was free or for next to no money. And just trying to get the reputation out there, get the reps into being a better commentator, and spending the time to review what I was doing. Did I miss things? Could I have done things better? And being very self-critical has always been kind of a key towards, at least the growth that I've found. And I think that is a story that a lot of people would say the same thing in terms of other titles or other positions, whether it's hosting, being an analyst, being an interviewer, being a stage host, or being a commentator. It's not an easy industry to get into. It's very cutthroat. It's very dog eat dog. But at the same rate, there is this natural level of personal resiliency and being able to bet on yourself that has to be there no matter what path you think is best for you. That's I think the biggest piece of advice that I've either learned or heard from other people.
Well, no, I think that's great advice. I think everyone out there, you have to understand, like you said, you have to get the reps. And like, yeah, maybe it's not advantageous to do an event for, free or kind of little to
Sure.
whatever, but you have to do these things, like especially in these entertainment world where everybody wants these opportunities. Everybody wants these opportunities. And if you were going to really try to excel and set yourself apart, like you were making these YouTube videos, you weren't getting paid to do the recaps. They weren't sponsored content. You were doing it because you believed in it. Probably cost you money. It obviously cost you time and resources. And that was the uncompensated time that you put in to highlight your knowledge, to show your spin, how you're going to present a broadcast. And without that, you couldn't move on to the next step. And I feel like a lot of people, especially the young people, they don't understand that part, right? They think, oh, well, if I'm going to do this, I need to make all this money. You need to give me this, this, and this. And, they think that they're coming out as a top draft pick, but it's like, that's really not the reality of this. And no matter what the internet tells you, that's not how this actually happens.
No, definitely not. And, again, I think a lot of people who had been, we'll say, in the space over the course of the last, we'll just put a general 2.5 year mark over it, where esports is finding a lot of success. There's been a lot of trickle down moves that have eliminated a lot of positions, and people are starting to realize it's like, wow, like doing this as a full-time pursuit is not just difficult, it's also rare to find the success. And there has to be a level of, self-sustainment that comes with that from a financial side. Like a lot of people that were in esports, whether it's commentary, broadcast, production, whatever it happens to be, are now having to find part-time or other full-time jobs. And then you spend your hours after 5 o'clock and weekends trying to pursue making it happen. It is a difficult pathway. And I think those people that can come in with a level head and not just think it's going to be something that's going to be gifted because you love video games and you're an esports fanatic. There are times where like the most passionate people sometimes don't find themselves in the right positions, and it's sometimes out of your control. And living with that and being able to find time to sleep with that sometimes can be very difficult. But I think that it always comes back to the same point of like, you just have to be firm in your belief in yourself and that, hey, maybe this thing didn't go well. Maybe I didn't hit my goals. Maybe I need to have a moment of self-reflection to figure out what is the best option for me from a business side or a professional side to find the most amount of growth, because it's never one way. And sometimes you go into it thinking that this is the way and I'm going to find success doing this. And maybe you do find success for the first 1.5 years, but I mean, the esports market changes on a daily basis, and sometimes you have to reevaluate and spend time in a different way that maybe you didn't expect. So it is a lot of reflection, a lot of critical thinking from a self-inspective way, in terms of being able to kind of go with the punches and adapt and, find a way to make it happen. It's a difficult question to answer, but I think there's also a lot of luxury in the fact that there is no right way to go about it. Like, you don't have to go to medical school and then do your residency and then go and be a doctor after that. Like, you can make it happen in a variety of ways. And sometimes, you have to catch bottle of lightning in a bottle a little bit to, be able to make it happen. It's just sometimes luck comes through. It's hard to say.
Right. So shout out to everyone that, out there pursuing it. You got to get that side hustle. You got to do what you got to do. These entertainment worlds, like, I don't know how many of my clients that are rappers and musicians and creative people, like, they have a day job, and you have the day job to keep sustaining while you pursue the dream. And hopefully you get to the point where you don't need both.
Right.
And, understanding that, like you said, being realistic with yourself is, really important. So kind of shifting gears a little bit, let's talk about Clutch GG. So, what is it, and, why was it formed, and what are some of the services?
Yeah, so Clutch GG is a kind of a very niche esports broadcast production studio that I kind of came up with the idea for. Actually, it was the stemming of it all came from a spot of Cold War Call of Duty. I was doing Challengers Elite. There were 9 commentators. And me and 2 other guys, we kind of looked at ourselves as, after our first talent meeting, the matches we were scheduled for, what our year looked like, we kind of looked at it and said, wow, we're considered the bottom trio in the eyes of Activision and the Call of Duty league that was handling challengers, and we wanted to change that. And so we ended up coming across not just the 3 of us, but we had known people that were working in esports production that were super talented. We're trying to find a way to break through. the wall of getting picked up by or hired by the major production studios that are out there, but didn't have the resume for it. So we kind of self-created a little bit of a collective group that wanted to put on extra broadcast support for challengers. And we really felt really passionately about why we were doing what we were doing and what we were doing. And then it got to a point where we started to see that, hey, there's an opportunity here. We've got really talented observers. We've got really talented producers. We've got really talented commentators. And we know a lot of other people in the space, both on the back end of production as well as camera facing. And then also on top of that, other clientele that were looking for broadcast support partners. And it finally came to a point where I was like, I think we could make this into like a very niche broadcast production studio, and fit into a space that, hey, I'm a client and I want to run a $5,000 tournament, but I only have $1,500 of broadcast production budget. Groups that are out there that do all the major events, your ESLs, your Esports Engine, your OS Studios, they're not going to have any interest in doing that. I mean, their quotes are going to be 20 times the amount of money that the prize pool is. So we kind of use it as a chance to be like, hey, yeah, we can do this, and we can provide a quality broadcast for pretty much cheap. People that were just looking to make their day rates, or maybe even a little less than what they kind of want to make, just for the chance to have something that they can throw onto a resume. And we got our first real go at it, doing Challengers LCQ during, was it the Vanguard year? It was the Cold War year. And we, just looked for broadcast support partners and sponsors. It was LAG, Atlanta FaZe, in New York, all said like, yeah, we'll help you guys do this, because they all had Challengers teams or Challengers team affiliates that year. And then after that, I was like, okay, like, hey, people are willing to support this with, from a financial standpoint, let's make this a full-time thing. And then going into Vanguard, we ran a launch event for one of the, I think it was for New York that year. And that turned into, hey, like, let's keep actually pursuing this. And so that eventually led to last year, we did Challengers Elite as the main broadcast partner for it. We've worked with New York, we've worked with Boston, we've worked with Atlanta, we've worked with Florida. And now we're actually doing a high school league here in the entire state of North Carolina. And it kind of turned into kind of going back to it, not just a secondary focus for me, but it also provided an opportunity to get more people, more opportunities in the professional space, and make sure that they're getting rewarded and compensated for that where they should be. So it's been a really fun pursuit. This year has been a bit of a weirder year, because we were expecting to do more stuff with challengers. That didn't come through. So it kind of lit a fire under me to, hey, I had 12 people that were, for 6 months, we thought we were going to have a 12-month contract, and then it didn't end up happening. So it's kind of relit a bit of a fire for me to try to find more opportunities and spaces for these people to get a chance to continue working in esports. And it's been a really, really fun pursuit. Not just working with new people, but this high school league has also kind of expanded my own network, and not just working with the people that are running the high school league, but I'm also finding new commentators, new producers that are all looking to kind of take a next step. And I feel like we fit into a space that we can provide a launching pad. Get your experience working on some good looking broadcast with some good clients, and then turn that into an opportunity to, when, your major production partners that are running major live events and major flagship esports programs are looking to hire, they'll have chances at, putting together a good resume with good video VOD experience that they can look back on and say, this is what I did. And, that resume will be way more significant than anything that maybe they could have had in the past. And that's the fun part. It's kind of like telling the challenger stories. I like being able to help out people, try to move into the right direction, try to make esports a full-time pursuit.
Definitely. I think that's amazing. And like you said, they need this opportunity. They need the reps, and to give them the professional footage to make their reels. And it makes a lot of sense. Is it going to just a professional, semi-pro? Is it like local tournaments? Is it collegiate? Or is it whoever, whatever level?
I mean, it's a little whatever at this point. Like I said, we're right now, our main focus, as this is being recorded, we're running 3 conference broadcasts across North Carolina for their spring league. So that's been kind of our main focus. But we also had, at the beginning of the year, done a launch event for Boston. There's other conversations that are happening for things that could potentially come into the future. Nothing in particular, nothing at least I can speak about right now, but we are trying to find the space to work in any level at this point. And I think the thing about it is, we provide an experience that I think is needed in this broadcast world. Because for a lot of people, hey, I'm trying to run a pretty significant event. We'll call it $20,000 to $50,000 tournament, but I don't want to pay $80,000 for production costs. I think that there is a level of overspending and maybe even overquoting in the broadcast production space. And, my only responsibility is to make sure that the people that I have on my roster are getting paid the money that they think that they're worth. In terms of, working with the client, hey, I don't have enough money to pay for your top end producer. Okay, well, I've got other people that are a little bit newer. The quality may not be as guaranteed or may not be as high, but it's passionate people. It's just someone with a little bit lesser experience and they're charging less. So, hey, I can make that happen. And sometimes that happens. This high school league is a prime example. Like, sure, I could cast high school Valorant, but it's not something that the product needs. It's not something the client wants necessarily. Why not give that chance to somebody who is growing and give them an opportunity to, put again another thing on the reel, like you said. So I think we fit in a very flexible space in especially the esports world that has demanded more flexibility, especially from their partners and suppliers.
Amazing. I think there's definitely a need for it. And, these events, whether it's on college campuses or local ones, adding that added production value, that professionalism just elevates everything. The viewership, the participants' experience, it just brings it to that next level. And, I think it's great that you're able to kind of bring it at a more affordable price point than some of the other ones out there that you've mentioned and that we know. We know there are some down in the South that are quite pricey as well. Yeah. So, what's the future hold for you in casting?
Goodness.
Where you kind of go from
That's a great
here?
question. It's really funny because every now and again I still look at the year and say, like, what are my goals for this year? The higher up I think in the ladder, the more difficult it is to attain the goals that you want. And some of the time it's just some things that are completely out of your hands. Especially, kind of being at the tier 1 space. I think for me, in terms of like where my commentary is, I want to be the best representation of what the CDL is as possible that I can be. And that has already required me to kind of change and modify some of my stylistic kind of set traits that I'd had previously going through challengers. Working with Study as a new duo has also kind of put me in a spot where I need to reevaluate like what I brought to a more long-standing duo before and trying to modify not just my own mechanics and techniques, but also making sure I'm very much so understanding the vibe and the tone that I'm going to get with Jay as compared to working with other people that I've worked with in the past. So there is this level of kind of in the live moment, just so I like figuring things out. But I think, long-standing goals and things that I kind of want to achieve, I do want to bring some new content ideas to the table. I've kind of, since the 2019, 2020, even a little bit of 2021 year, I kind of pushed aside the YouTube side of things. I would love to kind of restart up more of a COD breakdown analysis series. I've been doing that with Call of Duty Mobile, and the community there has really been eating it up. There are people who do it in the COD space, so it's not a unique idea. So there are some... internal conversations.
I mean, none of it's unique. Some people are doing the Call of Duty mobile space
100%,
too, right?
100%. And I think the thing with the CDL space in particular is that, there is this level of trying to find a new creative idea, to stand out and to make the content desirable. I've got a handful of ideas that I've kind of tossed around in my sleep a little bit, but it's down to trying to find ways to execute and make sure that it's not just like, I want to try it, but it's more of like, I want to do it, and this is how I'm going to do it. So there's some figuring out that comes along with that, while also, again, at the same rate, making sure that I've got all the numbers in the world available to me now that I'm doing CDL related stuff. So the ability to digest and create narratives around whatever matchup I get scheduled for is limitless. So there is a lot of more keeping your nose to the grindstone this year than maybe even in years past, because like for challengers, all you can really track is player roster history and recent performances like during cups. It's been more difficult, I think, to break into the individual storytelling outside of those general broad strokes compared to the CDL, where, hey, you can go back and compare Simp's debut in Black Ops 4 to where he is now. Like there's years and years of things that you can pull as more of a historical measure. So there's a lot more of the do the best job that I possibly can right now. That's, I think, where my main focus is, more than like what do I want to achieve by the end of the year? I think at this point.
Definitely. Well, that's amazing. Definitely great to be up there and, working with the biggest broadcasts in the different games. So I like to end each episode with my 3 questions. What's your favorite game to watch? I think I have an idea.
I mean, yeah, COD. Definitely a big COD fan when it comes to watching COD. I would say like my biggest guilty pleasure esport to watch though is probably somewhere between Rocket League and the FGC, the fighting game space. I just think it's so unique and so cool. And I think for Rocket League in particular, I think that title has the most opportunity to really break through the global space in terms of how we'll call it the regular people view esports, because it is just soccer with cars if you really boil it down to its most basic foundations. So there is a level of natural understanding that will, I think, allow it to catapult to the highest of levels, and we've definitely seen instances of that. So it is a really fun esport to watch for that. It also, I think, kind of tickles a little bit of an itch where it comes to, like, again, I was a traditional sports kid. I played baseball my entire life growing up, and I still watch a lot of NFL, MLB, NHL, especially now with the playoffs going on. So that approach towards Rocket League is, I think, more traditional sports-like than any other esport out there. So it's kind of, dabbles into 2 pools. And then the FGC is just so raw, man. I mean, those guys that are on broadcast, there's like no structure, and they do it in such a cool way that just is so freaking passionate. I just love watching it, even though I would never be good at either of those 2 games. They are some of my favorite to watch.
Well, what's your favorite game to play?
Right now, it's still Call of Duty, believe it or not. But it's actually kind of funny because I don't really spend as much time playing, I think, as a lot of the other CDL talent that are out there, or even like there are other esports talent that are focused in their titles. I think that comes with the not just focus that I have towards wanting to be good when it comes to casting challengers, casting the CDL, casting COD Mobile, casting possibly Warzone Mobile, but I also dabble in Valorant too. So it's like I do have to kind of split my time between both titles. And a lot of that comes down to the time management and resource management of I don't get a lot of time to play as much as I do watching and kind of taking notes and making sure I'm set up for whatever broadcasts are happening that week. So yeah, my time towards gaming is a lot less than what it was maybe back during like college or right after college, and I was starting to kind of make it happen as a someone in the camera facing talent space.
Right, isn't that the joke that like when you work in gaming, you really have any time to game?
Pretty much. I mean, I think it's different for every person that's out there, but I think most of the games that I play now are like wind down games. Like I've been playing a lot of Balatro lately, the little poker roguelike game. I have been eating that up because games.
I'm a big Marvel Snap guy. That's my
Yeah,
game of choice.
Games that last 15, 20
what's
minutes.
your favorite video game character? Yeah, exactly. Favorite video game character?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think if I were to pick, I'm kind of like leaning towards like saying like Link from the Legend of Zelda, because that was a game that I had played growing up, and played as well like through like I think that's probably the most long-standing game I've ever played, is anything Zelda related. So I think the Link story is really fun, really cool. I'm trying to think what else would be like a out of pocket pick. This would be a good one. I'm a big Jimmy Raynor fan. Like StarCraft series, okay. I think that his character's dope. So those are probably like my top 2 if I were to pick any.
Okay, I like the StarCraft reference. I'm a big StarCraft guy. So
Jimmy Raynor is such a cool freaking story.
Right, Terran. He's a Terran.
Yeah. Right? Terran Marine.
Yes.
Yep.
Wonderful. Yes, amazing. So this was so great. Thank you so much for joining us. Tell about where they can connect with you and learn about what you're working on.
Yeah, I mean, I hold shift at just about every social platform. I don't really post much to Instagram, but it does happen every now and again when I'm at an event. I post to Instagram.
You got to get on it, man. If you're a content creator, Instagram Reels, especially if TikTok's gonna go bye-bye, you need somewhere to.
I had to laugh a little bit when you were like, "Yeah, this is I hold shift." He's this that, and he streams. I was like, I really don't stream.
Well, it's on your bio, so I got it from your bio.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't fire up the stream all that often. Every now and again, sure, but more often than not, you can stay in touch with me like through Twitter. That's probably my most.
Yeah, so everyone follow him on Twitter. Make sure to hold shift when you're doing it. And thanks everybody for tuning in, and follow me on Twitter, Justin JESQ, and check Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube for all past episodes.